The list of environmental disasters is long, so long most people don't even know there's still problems. In Centralia, Pennsylvania, a fire has been burning for over 50 years. They can't put it out. In May 1962, a coal seam in an old mine caught fire. They think somebody was burning refuse in there, dumped some stuff in there and burned it. And it has been burning ever since. There's a coal fire polluting the earth in Pennsylvania that's been burning for 50 years. We started something we can't put out. Should we be creating things we can't fix? Is that ethical? We need the heat. We need the coal. We have the abandoned coal mines now. We have to do something with them. I have a friend who was in the oil business. He was president of an oil company in Louisiana, a very important oil company, but not big, important to Louisiana. And his fear was that the same thing would happen to an oil site. Why? Coal burns nice and slowly. You keep giving it oxygen, it keeps burning. Oil burns instantly and massively. And his fear was that we would set an oil well on fire. They don't go on fire. We would set an oil well on fire that was somehow connected underground to massive deposits of oil in the Middle East, because the deposits can be very close together. And then the entire Middle East would be burning for centuries. Literally, that was his fear. He would have dreams about it. So we are building things, and we have been for several hundred years, that we can't necessarily fix. If we've got them, shouldn't we be very careful, recognize that we have them, and start trying to address them in some way? So, you see that the protocols for the Love Canal are antiquated, and it couldn't hurt to retest. But are we at least getting better at spotting new things? No. In 2015, there was a methane gas leak from a storage tank in California, Southern California, on a place called Porter Ranch. 100,000 tons of methane gas leaked. That's 1/4 of the annual pollution rate in Southern California. Do you know how much pollution they make in Southern California? It would be nice if I could tell you that they quickly found the leak and fixed it, and that was just a sort of an immediate problem, and it leaked that quickly, that fast, because the hole was that big in the pipe. It was a 7-inch metal pipe, by the way, that was breached. But I have to tell you that the leak went on for a long time, and the people responsible for that plant did not detect it. So we still have scenarios today where new environmental disasters are occurring that haven't necessarily occurred before, and we're not paying any attention to it. We still don't have tests out there making sure that what we're doing is right. At least in computer science, we now have security guys out there making sure that what we produce isn't hackable, and if it is, they send it in to us. It's actually a very nice thing. So let's go back to the Love Canal. Do you remember the finale in the video? Kind of waving the flag and promising that this would never happen again? It says, we now have these things to help ensure this never happens again. Doesn't that make you feel like the problem is solved? I should have said the last. The second Love Canal video should have assured you that these kinds of words are red flags. When I hear a politician speaking like this or a company speaking like this, I think, okay, That's still an issue. The person who has solved the problem best for now is probably the person who's going to come out and say something like, okay, we have a protocol now in place. We don't yet know how well that protocol will work, but we will be monitoring it to make sure it does. How will we be monitoring it? We'll be checking the additional neighborhoods around the Love Canal. We will be giving these people this data to assure them that it is correct. I get a notice from my house in New Hampshire every year that tells me all of the testing on the well. Don't really understand on the water system in the town. Don't really understand it all, but it assures me every single year that my water supply is fine. The problem is my water doesn't come on city water. Mine comes in a well that was built 200 and something years ago. My house and the house next door, one of the 3 original houses in the town, uses its own well. Nobody ever tests it. So every year I get a letter from the water district saying that my water is good to drink. I don't drink it, by the way, but it's great water to wash your hair in. So I decided there were free water testing in California. So I took a tube back to New Hampshire, took a sample, and brought it back to California. Got a phone call. Are you Arlene Louise Perkins? Yes. Did you send in a water sample? And now I have to remember where I sent it in from. I said, yes. And they said, stop drinking this water instantly. I said, I'm not drinking the water. I'm drinking bottled water. And they said, oh, good. We can't figure out where this water is. I didn't have a heart to tell them. But it's not safe to drink. I have owned that house for 10 years. Every year they assure me it is safe to drink. If I hadn't known I had a well, I'd have thought the water was just fine. When someone makes you feel like a technical problem is 100% solved, even in computer science, that's when you start to question them. How important is the environment of our economy? Oh my God. How important is our environmental health? By the 1990s, the Soviet Union had 40% of those huge lands environmentally stressed. 40%. I mean, there's places where nobody lives anywhere just about. People were dying. People were sick, not just one generation, but 3 generations of families were dying from their policies. Eventually, the pollution got so bad that the government lost the support of the population. The government had lied to them too many times, and the evidence was too clear at so many locations. The government fell. The government failed. The government failed to meet the needs of the citizens by keeping them healthy enough to maintain the ability to have families and reproduce. And then, I guess I did mean, and the government fell. That's the major reason why the Soviet Union collapsed. In World War II, Japanese soldiers trusted their officers and their politicians. But then when they started to lose the war, they were not allowed back in. A ship full of injured soldiers would come back to port in the mainland, and they would be only allowed to disembark at night so that nobody could see that they had soldiers who were injured. A suicide bomber buried himself under the road to blow up an oncoming group of Americans. The Americans never got there. He stayed there all day underneath the ground, doing what his government had told him to do, sacrificing himself for the war effort. And at the end of the day, when he still had nothing to blow up, he had been sweating underneath the road, buried for the day. He got up and he said, my government's lying to me. This cannot be the best way to fight a war. He, in fact, left the army illegally and swam to another island and stayed there till the end of the war. It wasn't until they saw that their government was lying to them that they decided not to trust the government again. In World War I, Germany made a major push in 1917, and they succeeded. They crossed the trenches. They crossed no man's land. They got to the back, to the rear of the French army. The French army was routed. The German army had been told they were starving. They had been told that the people in France didn't have any food either, that all of the armies were starving, and the only way they were going to get sufficient food was if they finished this war off. Well, when they got to the rear of the French army, they found their food stores. They had a lot of food. The German army, not the officers, but the enlisted men, were so angry at their government lying to them that they sat down and they ate. So instead of pursuing their advantage, they simply stopped and ate. They were being told to continue, but they stopped because they had been lied to. And so they weren't going to listen again. They were hungry. They were going to eat. That gave France and her allies enough time to counteract that charge and drive the Germans back. Lying, a government lying to you, is the worst thing that you can do. People will eventually find out and stop believing. In the meantime, enormous damage can occur to the earth. We have to be pre-vigilant and check ahead of time instead of afterwards. You can tell I do not believe one government is different from another. And I don't necessarily believe one programmer is different from another, or one citizen is different from another. We make a choice to become the programmer who's different, to become the citizen who's different, by paying attention, by noticing what's going on in our local environment at least, and being proactive about it. Next week's lecture will be on a situation in South Mississippi that I was proactive on and tried to help lead the effort to stop something happening that should never happen. But you'll see that next week. These are the same skill sets that programmers need. We need to challenge ourselves, just like activists challenge the government. We need to ask ourselves over and over again, is my design good enough? Will it take me into the future? Can I test it? Can I test my testing to make sure that it's in fact working well? That's where, in my opinion, your ethical responsibility has to be as a programmer. To be different. To question things and check them out to make sure that they make sense. Only 10% of programmers are very effective. The rest of the 90% rarely produce code that's working. This is part of how you become that 10%.